Welcome to a lecture on the rule of law in Poland with Dr. Marcin Romanowski, presented by the Institute of World Politics. For those of you who are new, IWP is a graduate school of national security, intelligence, and international affairs. We offer a doctoral program, seven master's degree programs, including 2 online MAs, and 18 certificates of graduate study. If you are interested in learning more about us, please visit iwp.edu. To support our work, please visit iwp.edu/donate. Today's lecture is part of the 12th annual Kosciuszko Chair Spring Symposium in honor of Lady Blanka Rosenstiel. We will be hearing from Dr. Marcin Romanowski, who will give a lecture on the topic of current discussions on the rule of law in Poland in light of changes in the judiciary after 1989. Dr. Romanowski is an assistant professor at the Department of Theory and Philosophy of Law of the Faculty of Law and Administration within the Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński University in Warsaw. He has a doctoral degree in law from the Faculty of Law and Administration at the Nicholas Copernicus University in Torun. The main areas of his research interest are the law of settlement with the past lawlessness in countries, the natural law and the non-positivist concepts of law, the theory of European and global law, and legal anthropology and its applications in the creation and application of the law. During his professional career, Dr. Romanowski was the director of the Institute of Justice from 2016 to 19, an expert for the Parliamentary Investigative Commission to investigate allegations of corruption cases disclosed in the media during work on the amendment of the Broadcasting Act, 2003 to 2004, and a co-author of the report prepared by this commission. And in the years 2005 to 2007 and 2015 to 19, advisor to the Minister of Justice. Since 2019, he has served as Poland's Deputy Minister of Justice. Welcome, Dr. Romanowski.
In my lecture, I would like to look at the background of the current political and legal disputes in Poland and explain their sources. Situated, in my opinion, in the events of the political transformation 30 years ago. In Poland, we are dealing with a very strong political and legal dispute. In current shape has been underway since 2015. The political dispute is between the ruling coalition of the United Right on the one hand and on the other, liberal or social democratic parties, partly of the post-communist origin. Interestingly and importantly, many current politicians are people active in social or political life back in the 1980s. Among the politicians of the United Right, there are still some activists of the anti-communist underground. Former opponents of the communist regime are present also in the side of the current opposition. However, they are also activists of the former Communist Party. The first dispute held in 2015-2016 concerned the Constitutional Tribunal, which in Poland rules inter alia on the compliance of laws and other legal acts with the Constitution. In the fall of 2015, the term of office of 5 of 15 judges of the tribunal was to end. The Polish constitution indicates that judges of the tribunal are elected by an absolute majority of votes by the Sejm, the lower house of parliament, for a 9-year term. The ruling liberal coalition, wishing to secure a majority in the tribunal, led to the adoption of a new law on the Constitutional Tribunal in June 2015, which accelerated the election of judges of the tribunal by the old parliament. After the victory in the fall of 2015, the parliamentary majority of the United Right adopted regulations that reversed these changes. The second important dispute was the one caused by the changes in the National Council of the Judiciary and in the Supreme Court. The National Council of the Judiciary is an important body regulated in the Constitution, whose task is to provide binding opinions on candidates for judges and judicial promotions. In Poland, we currently have a three-tier structure of the judiciary: circuit, district, and appeal courts. The fourth level of the judiciary is the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court exercises judicial supervision over the common judiciary. The court answers legal questions from common courts in hard cases and examines extraordinary means of appeal. It also has other competences such as deciding on the legality of elections, which is of course very important competence. In accordance with the Constitution, the National Council of the Judiciary consists of 25 members, 15 of whom are elected from among judges of the Supreme Court and other courts. In 2017, the Parliament adopted a law which, instead of the appointment of those judges by the judicial self-government, adopted a new regulation stating that judges candidates for the council are nominated by judges but elected by the Sejm, the lower chamber of the parliament. In addition, a reform of the Supreme Court was carried out, introducing inter alia a new disciplinary chamber responsible for disciplinary proceedings against judges and representatives of other legal professions. The chamber enjoyed considerable autonomy in relation to the remaining chambers of the Supreme Court, in which the overwhelming majority were held by judges recommended in the past who were definitely reluctant to any changes in judiciary. So these political reforms which started in Poland at the end of 2015, following the alternation in power and taking over the rule by the United Right, provoked and determined resistance on the circles of liberals and post-communist social democrats. My thesis is as follows, that this resistance to profound changes in the judiciary resulted directly from the partial nature of the systemic transformation process in 1989 and subsequent years. There's, of course, no place here for a broad Poland's historical retrospection of the 1980s. It is, as it's probably known, the emergence of a huge 10 million strong social movement Solidarity in 1980 ended after a little over a year with the suppression of this peaceful revolution by the army. Throughout the decade, Poland was an arena of social unrest, falling into an ever deeper economic crisis. What was decisive for further events in Poland and in the entire so-called Eastern Bloc, it was the arms race lost by the Soviet Union, which was a consequence of Ronald Reagan's policy and the progressive erosion of the economies of communist countries, ended with the former collapse of communist regimes in Europe in 1989 and the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. In Poland, the transformation has begun with the Round Table talks in February 1989. The agreement reached in April this year formed the basis for slow systemic transformations. But at the same time, the Round Table agreements de facto guaranteed inviolability for the members of the communist establishment and guaranteed the preservation of their property position and economic interests. As a result of the Round Table agreements, the Communist Party amended the constitution. In this so-called April Amendment, the office of the President of the Republic was established, which was elected by the parliament. The first president became General Wojciech Jaruzelski, the author of the martial law in 1981. A second chamber of parliament, the Senate, was created. The National Council of the Judiciary was established, which will be discussed later. There was a political determination at the Round Table that 65% of seats in the the lower chamber of the parliament, would be guaranteed to the ruling coalition of communist parties. And the remaining 35% of seats in the Sejm and all in the Senate would be filled in completely free elections. This is how a semi-democratic, so-called contract parliament was created. On the one hand, the April Amendment launched the transformation process, but in principle it guaranteed power to the communist establishment and did not change the state system fundamentally. The next amendment to the Polish Constitution of this December 1989, the official name of the state was changed from the People's Republic of Poland to the Republic of Poland. An axiological redefinition of the state was made in that amendment. The previous regulation defining Poland as a socialist state was replaced by a regulation according to which the Republic of Poland is a democratic state ruled by law. The provision guaranteeing the monopoly position of the Polish Communist Party was replaced with the one according to which the Republic of Poland ensures the freedom to create and operate political parties. In order to finalize the changes concerning the essence of the state system and its value, regulation was introduced guaranteeing private property and freedom of economic activity in place of public property. However, in political and legal practice, these changes were inconsistent, delayed, often superficial and merely symbolic. Settlement with the communist past was kept to a minimum. There has been a broader annulment of grossly unfair judgments issued during the Stalinist era against members of the independence underground. But the perpetrators of the political murders and prosecutions have been punished to a very small extent. Similarly, the disclosure of the agents of the communist services, secret services, was realized with great resistance to a limited extent and with a very long delay. The return of property confiscated by the communists or the payment of compensation, at least part of the value of the lost property, was also not carried out with some minor exceptions. It's of course an undeniable fact that Poland, thanks to the departure from state capitalism to a relatively free market, significantly developed economically. However, it should not be forgotten that at the beginning of the transformation, Polish enterprises were liquidated on a massive scale and their assets were sold. In fact, there was a sell-off of outlets. It is also worth noting that people associated with the communist regime benefited the most at the beginning of the economic transformation, which left its mark on economic, social and political life in Poland till now. This can be clearly also in the Polish higher education system, where the former faculties of scientific socialism were renamed to become faculties of political sciences. The faculties of law, which promoted Marxist and Leninist version of law as the superstructure for the proletariat foundations, have become a bidding ground for experts in selectively understood and interpreted democratic constitutionalism and democratic rule of law, through which a very low awareness of what democracy is and what the rule of law should look like. The picture of the law of settlements with the past shows the sad truth about Poland in 2015 as the Poland of late post-communism. And it's an accurate description of the social, legal and political reality of the so-called Third Polish Republic. The effect of the revolution of 1989 was not so much in the democratization of the Polish system as it is commonly believed, but in the division of influence and capital between the former communist establishment and some opposition leaders from the Republic of Poland. In the vast majority of the licensed tamed opposition, or with leaders who were secret collaborators of the communist security services. Thus, that distribution was supposed to be guaranteed by the rule of law and as an essentially unchangeable principle, just to prevent any attempts and questioning the settlement which became the foundation for the system of the Third Polish Republic. The reality is that the changes laboriously introduced after 2015 in Polish legislation were not so much an alleged attack on the rule of law, but an attempt, unfortunately a late one, to reverse the logic of the negotiated revolution of 1989. And it was the representatives of those circles that concluded the deal in 1989, post-communist liberals, who became the greatest defenders of the rule of law, recognizing that the reforms initiated after 2015 dismantled the rule of law, destroyed democracy, and destroyed the achievements of the Polish political transformation. As a result, it may be said that the axiological changes which were introduced in the Polish system in early 1990s were a change of a signboard rather than a transformation in the essence of things. And so the Polish People's Republic was replaced with the Republic of Poland, the socialist rule of law with the democratic rule of law, the monopoly of the Polish Communist Party with the pluralism of political parties, and the fundamentals of Marxism, Leninism with political sciences, which replaced the apology of socialist democracy with the apology of liberal democracy. Well, by the way, a similar thing happened in, for example, constitutional law. The theory of single power was replaced with the theory of separation of powers, with no deeper thought on what that separation in fact is and whether it should be understood a bit differently than Montesquieu understood it over 200 years ago. Well, Montesquieu has become a symbol of the separation of powers theory, despite the fact that his version of the separation seems outdated in the 21st century. Well, to go further, the doctrine about the international alliance of Poland and the Soviet Union was replaced after 2004 with the doctrine about the membership of Poland in the European Union and the resulting obligations. However, those superficial changes were not accompanied by any deeper reflection that resulted in the inertia in solving some specific problems. For example, the aforementioned issue of transitional justice, which is fundamental for most post-authoritarian systems and which is related to the settlement of the issue of the non-democratic past and the accountability of those standing behind it. Settlement mechanisms, including legal ones, were introduced in East Germany, in Romania, or in the Czech Republic, while in Poland, each attempt to make people related to ancien regime accountable was recognized as a violation of the rule of law. Transitional justice, which is an important element of constructing each democratic system on the ruins of former authoritarianism, has been replaced in Poland with the ideology of leaving the past behind. That was supposed to put an end to discussions on the past and the need to account for communist crimes, including the massacre of workers on the coast in December 1970, the massacre of miners in the Wujek mine during the martial law, or the brutal murder of priest Jerzy Popiełuszko committed in 1984 by the Communist Security Service. The voices speaking about the need to settle the past were silenced with the statement that such settlements are unnecessary or even socially harmful in the stated ruled by law, as they heat up emotions and return to the past pointlessly. Well, as a result, for the majority of the communist establishment, the rule of law became a smokescreen guaranteeing impunity. Touching the past, if only to learn about the true, is or was often recognized as an irrational and primitive retaliation. That may be seen, for example, in the discussions concerning the Institute of National Remembrance, which is sometimes seen by liberals as a right-wing fundamentalist institution lusting for revenge. Well, that same inertia pertains to fundamental and real reforms in the area of the political system. What attracts one's attention here is most of all a lack of wider discussion on the systemic position of courts and the third pillar of power in general. The solutions implemented in the Polish constitutional system throughout the 1980s were in fact petrified, with no greater modifications at all. The introduced institutions, hailed as democratic at the close of the Polish People's Republic, were simply recognized as such and enjoyed unlimited trust in the later period, which eliminated any and all discussions about them. What is more, in majority, they were treated as the institutions which slowly but effectively led to the political transformation of 1989, which legitimized them in itself and released them from the whipping post of discussion and possible adjustment. That was the situation with, for example, the Supreme Administrative Court established in 1980 or the Constitutional Tribunal established formally in 1982, but in fact created 3 years later, 85, so 4 years before the systemic change of 1989. That also happened to the mentioned National Council of the Judiciary, established in 1989 under the April Amendment. The establishment of the latter institution may be the best piece of evidence to confirm that the meaning of the April Amendment was the authoritarian closing rather than, as some may insist, the democratic opening of the Polish system. After all, it was decided at the round table that systemic modifications may apply to the executive power and the legislative power, but the judiciary should be moved away from all political disputes and hidden behind the screen of National Council of the Judiciary. In the name of respect for the rule of independence of courts and the judiciary. The National Council of Judiciary was petrified, and it was perfect for this role. Firstly, it was because as a new institution, it was not burdened with the discrediting past after 1989. Secondly, it was fitted prematurely into the constitutional reality for which even the very concept of the third power was alien. But well, last but not least, it was because it provided the grounds for non-changeability when creating the new constitution, as that institution was not bound with the socialist baggage, and it was even intuitively associated with the democratic transformation. The issue of possible pathologies of the judiciary was struck off with the slogan of self-cleansing, which definitely closed the discussion on the need for more extensive changes, which would also include the third power. The result of such an approach was the fact that the judiciary, which were the most distinguished and proven communist regime officials worked in the period of the Polish People's Republic, was excluded, a priori excluded from the discussion on the systemic transformation. Establishing the National Council of the Judiciary was the very important fact. The establishment of the Council as the institution responsible for selecting the human resources was supposed to guarantee that no greater changes in the judiciary would ever take place. What should be emphasized here is the fact that such democratic staffage of the judiciary took place even before the introduction of the rule of law principle, which was effected in December 1989, and most of all before the introduction of the principle of separation of powers to the Polish constitutional law, which did not take place until the small constitution adopted in October 1992, so 3 years after the systemic transformation. Well, as a consequence, the signboard of the democratic, independent and apolitical third power was suspended long before that category became a systemic fact, and it was done in the conditions of the single state power principle. No attention is paid to that today, while it has a great importance for the understanding of the grammar of the Polish judiciary. Therefore, it is paradoxical that the image of the third power, with all its democratic benefits like separation, independence, and a political nature, has been constructed in the conditions of the single state power and was not guaranteed with the principle of the separation of powers and the rule of law until much later. People were also perfectly aware of that fact later, when the weaknesses of the Polish judiciary were diagnosed after years. Most of those diagnoses, which were in fact correct, saw the essential flaw of the position of the courts in the National Council of the Judiciary, which began to be shaped at the round table and whose actual operation was an obstacle for real changes in the judiciary. Both politicians and lawyers, who are currently the greatest enemies of the changes introduced by the United Right, have spoken in the past about the need to reform the Council of the Judiciary. All of them underlined that the Council petrified the system, that it was not representative as before changes. It was composed of only several percent of district court judges, while district court judges make 65% of the Polish judges, and was dominated by Supreme Court judges who make less than 5% of Polish judges. Well, all of them agreed that no important reforms of the Polish judiciary are possible without changes in the National Council of the Judiciary. The essence of that issue was captured in simple words by Andrzej Rzepliński, a former president of the Constitutional Tribunal, a man, a symbol of resistance to the current government, when he some years ago said following: "If we do not take the National Council of the Judiciary away from the judges, nothing can be done with the Polish judiciary." So this is the first statement, and the second one came from Donald Tusk, the leader of Civic Platform, the main opposition party, who 2007 state explicitly: throughout reform of the National Council of the Judiciary should be introduced. This is the program of Civic Platform from that year. The council should stop being a body of the judicial corporation and should become a guardian of the citizens' right to justice. Members of the National Council of the Judiciary should be elected by the same from among the candidates nominated by the senates of higher education institutions. It is necessary to introduce to the Council people with the moral and professional authority from outside the judiciary, not only to make the Council a representative of the interest of citizens, court clients, but also to make it an effective institution of the civic insight in and control over the process of selecting and nominating judges, who hold a very important portion of power in Poland. At present, that process does not meet the requirements of democratic order, as the selection of judges in practice takes place in a circle of corporate co-optation closed to citizens. So the words of leader of the current opposition, Donald Tusk. Of course, this pointing out the need for reforms in the National Council of the Judiciary was only one of many elements of the desired court reform. However, the reform still remained under discussion, which in fact was rather a discussion of secondary importance. The proposals of changes were effectively torpedoed with the statement that the National Council of the Judiciary is the result of the round table, which is invariably the cornerstone of the Polish democracy. Serious discussion on the Polish judiciary was not undertaken during the works on the new constitution, which was finally adopted in 1997. At that time, all talks focused on completely different issues, such as bicameral parliament, the right to life and its scope, the competences of the president and the competences of local governments. The issue of the third power was recognized as finally settled at the round table, and well, the only disputable elements were issues regarding the Constitutional Tribunal. It was considered whether it should be a part of the judiciary, or maybe it should have the status of a separate power. The issue of the finality of the tribunal's rulings was also debated upon. What is striking is the fact that no wider discussion on the third power was held during the serious talks on the new constitution in the Third Polish Republic. And the rule of law, which is rightly the supreme principle of the Polish constitution, is very distorted in our systemic conditions. It is actually difficult to speak about its atrophy, erosion, degradation, or retreat when from the very beginning it has been understood as a selective and very instrumental manner, and most of all with no consideration of the complexity of doctrinal constructions which have grown around the idea of the state ruled by law. After all, it may not be equaled today with a primitive tripartite system without taking into account independent agencies, so agency power, the mass media, including the new media, so the media power, political opposition, or an extensive control system in accordance with the well-known system of the control power. So the separation of power may not be considered without the judicial activism and the increasing role of the courts, which for Montesquieu were only the mouth of the law, but which today are a legitimate holder of power, which in addition has an appetite to become the supreme pillar of power. For some, this proves that for many acolytes of the idea of the rule of law, the latter is rather the idea of the rule of lawyers. And the separation of power may not be separated from the demand for the balance of power. It is actually a direct part of the Polish constitution, but is not a subject of any serious interests of lawyers or political scientists. Those who mention it are responded to with aggressive retorts. In fact, and unfortunately, such selective and very superficial treatment of the rule of law also excludes certain issues from the public discussion, which is, as a matter of fact, the essence of democracy. It is in that manner that debates on the reform of courts, the status of judges, or the need to bring order to the mass media are brought to an end. And discussion on those issues is most often ended with the accusation of attack on the rule of law and its separate parts like judicial independence, freedom of speech, or access to information. Meanwhile, the most general and at the same time the fundamental meaning of the rule of law is the building of trust between the rulers and the ruled. We have departed from the scheme that the trust is presented only in the act of election a long time ago. Well, the rule of law does not exclude certain ideas. For example, the judiciary or the mass media from the public discussion and legible and transparent game rules. Unfortunately, that is what has been missing in Poland, where political history shows that the transformation process was a process of selective changes and a selective approach to the rule of law. And to sum up, it is worth remembering the above described conditions when looking for the sources of the weaknesses of Polish state institutions and discussing the reasons for the so-called dispute over the rule of law in Poland that has been ongoing since 2015. These burdens from the past are for us also challenges to overcome and to improve public institutions, which is a particularly important task in view of the external threats from Russia that once again showed their topicality.
I would like to thank Dr. Romanowski and all of you who joined us today. If you are interested in attending other upcoming events, making a gift to IWP, or applying to one of our graduate programs, please visit iwp.edu.